Hey guys, RJ here, and after that huge cliffhanger we got in episode 6 of The Expanse, I was kind of really hoping they would give us some more explanation, and my wishes were granted this episode, so let's just dive into the episode 7 review of The Expanse. So guys, as always, if you have not seen episode 7 of The Expanse, please turn this off, go watch it, come back, and then we can talk about it. I don't want to spoil anything for you. With that out of the way, let's just kind of talk about this. I thought this episode was really well done. I don't think there were a ton of action impact moments, which I'm okay with because we've gotten so many this season that I feel like if they threw too many in at once, it would kind of start losing its value a little bit, where we get those huge moments like we did in Home and a few of the other episodes previously. So I do like the way that they're focusing more on character situations in this episode. We get a lot of stuff about Gunny and, what happened to her on Mars. There's a lot of flashbacks going on with that. We get a lot of character development for Naomi and this guy named Anderson Doors. And we get a lot of information in this episode, and I feel like we're starting to kind of culminate to what we see as people start picking sides. And they talked about this last episode where Fred Johnson was like, hey, eventually, man, you're going to have to choose a side to Holden. And while Holden disagrees with him, I think after this episode, he's kind of starting to realize that while we're all in this together, it's not always like that, and it's not always that simple. I wanted to do a quick hit on Amos because while he was only in this episode for probably like 3 to 5 minutes, his conversation with Cortazar and really just the way he seems to be doubting himself in general has me a little bit worried. And I think that's because he's kind of been, even though he's very unstable to the point of he'll beat people to death, I think he's been a very rock type character for Holden and other members of the crew of the Rosinante, right? He, at the time of, push comes to shove, he's not afraid to speak his mind and say exactly what he wants. And I really like that. I feel like that brings a good dynamic. But we kind of get this scene where, they're passing out all of these supplies and stuff to refugees, and he ends up basically telling people only get one, and he shoves down this little girl this mom for trying to take too many food packages basically, and her little girl comes over and runs to her and acts like Amos is one of the scariest people alive, and it kind of makes him introspection a little bit, and he starts questioning what he's doing, and he goes to talk to Cortazar, and I thought their conversation was very strange, and I'm kind of wondering where Amos went from there, because as we see at the end of this episode, Cortazar is captured by Anderson Doors, and there's a lot of things going on with that too. So before we get into the ending with Cortazar and what happened with him, let's just kind of talk about Gunny, because I'm on the Gunny for Rosinante crew train. I'm all ready for that. I really hope she ends up joining somehow, maybe her trip to Earth that was discussed at the end of this episode. Maybe she ends up running into the Rosinante crew, and maybe they help her transport ship that's going to the Earth Federation. I'm really curious to see how she eventually becomes involved, because clearly she is another main character at this point. I don't think there's any denying that, because she's the only one that survived that alien attack. We've gotten tons of information on her and a lot of different scenes. So, and I have to give her props. This episode, she did an absolutely standout job. Okay, this is probably some of the best acting I've seen on this show, period, bar none, because she not only does a few crying scenes where she's having flashbacks, she's got the lip quivering perfectly. She really does do a great job in the multiple scenes in which she's being questioned in this episode. And I really like the way where she's kind of fighting her inner self, where she's like, no, the earthling, or the earthers attacked us first, and then she kind of changes it, and she's fighting her inner demons to, not say that Earth basically blatantly attacked them, which I think she knows isn't true. It's pretty obvious that the Earth Marines were running from the creature or the person, or whatever you want to call it at this point. And, I think she's aware of that. I think that kind of her previous inclinations are leading her to, at first, she's like, no, it was they fired first and we were firing back, and if they want a war, we're going to give it to them. Whereas at the end of the episode, she's kind of, recalling exactly what happened with the pill that they give her. And I think that's more of just a memory pill, or basically a limitless pill of some sort, where it helps your brain work to extra. I don't know exactly, and maybe some book readers can fill us in on that. If it doesn't spoil anything, kind of give us a little TLDR of what that pill exactly does. I mean, it's pretty clear that it does something with their brain, but I am kind of curious as to that. And I really like the way that they have her kind of caught in the middle of this, right? Like she's a UN Marine, or she's a Mars Marine, and they're asking her to basically go to Earth and lie. And I think if Gunny has been one thing in this show so far, it is not a liar. I mean, she doesn't seem like she's a type of character that would just go in front and, lie to these people. And I think the bigger question here is, why is Mars having her lie? Is it to prevent war, or is it to hide something? And I think that's the bigger question we have to ask ourselves here is Mars hiding something that they're experimenting with the protomolecule? Because we learned from Mao that he said, I have other contacts, I have other resources, I don't just need you. And, maybe he was talking about people on Mars. So maybe they're running their own experiments with the protomolecule, which is all the more dangerous because that means two sides are using a weapon that they do not understand. And, I'm really interested to see, is Mars the good guy in this, or are they the bad guy just trying to cover something up exactly like Earth did before? I also have to give another huge shout out to Christian. She was terrific in the short scene that she was in during this episode where she's talking with the president and the president says, I knew your father, he was a great man, and why didn't you ever run for office? And Christian's response is perfect. It's like, I want to get shit on, but I want to keep my head. And, she seems like a definite good character at this point in the story. Unless there's some back ties that we don't know about as the viewer yet, she seems like the good character on Earth. She really does want the best thing for all of the people in the system, and I'd say that she's one of the few characters in the show that I genuinely trust to hopefully make the right decision when called upon. So I did love that little scene that they had there, and she did a great job. Another little thing I wanted to bring up kind of related to that scene is multiple fathers are brought up in this episode, and I don't know if that is supposed to mean anything, but, they bring up Gunny's dad, the Marine captain or whoever. I don't know his actual rank. I don't remember it. But the one that Gunny talks to at the end, and he's like, I knew your father. He was a good man. And they also bring up Christian's dad that I don't think we know that much about yet, at least, that he was a good man as well. And that's, why the president asked that. But I'm just kind of wondering, are they foreshadowing something here? Are we eventually going to meet these dads that were so important? So I am kind of curious as to where that goes. So let's move on to what I would say is a bulk part of this episode at the end here, where everything happening on Tycho Station, shit is kind of hitting the fan, right? I got to give props. Fred Johnson, in the meeting that he has with the OPA and all of the, factions or whatever, where Anderson Doors ends up being a douche, I really love his robe that he's wearing there. He looks classy as shit. But more importantly, the meeting that they all have with those factions is to decide what they are supposed to do with the nuclear warheads that they acquired from Earth. And I think that there's obviously a lot of tension going on here because there's so many different factions and so many different people wanting so many different things. And I think it's pretty clear at this point that Anderson Doors is not a good guy. He is playing on people's fears. He's basically every time Fred Johnson and Holden try to bring up something like, we can use these things as a bargaining chip to just bring Mars to the table or bring the outer belt to the table and, maybe give them back the nukes as a sign of peace. And then eventually we could actually have more pull within the system. And then you have Anderson Doors that's saying that's a pipe dream that could never happen. And, I do see both sides of the argument here. I think Anderson Doors is clearly an extremist. I don't really agree with most of the things he's saying. But I do understand where he's coming from, where he says, why would that stop them? If we give them back the nukes, where, what is the threat level to them? Why does that, influence the Belters enough that we should actually proceed with that kind of plan? And I do understand that, but I also understand Fred and Holden's thing where if we hold on to them, we're just going to become another target. You already see what happened on Ganymede Station. And, there are good points to both sides. And it's really hard for us to choose, which is what I like about the show, is it's kind of presenting both options as a gray area where there's kind of a wiggle room for both. But yeah, I think Anderson Doors, even though he does, have an argument to be made, I think he makes it in the completely wrong way. And I think he's really just manipulating people. And more on Anderson Doors, I think he's just ridiculously desperate, a desperate, grimy character, sort of. The way he kind of moves about this episode is just so slimy to me. He goes from person to person to person, trying to get anything he can out of them. He goes to Satara, he goes to Holden, Naomi, Diogo at the end, and it's just like, he tries to lead in. He's one of those sly, crafty motherfuckers that he just tries to lead in with like, oh yeah, I heard you were out in the belt for, like 5 days just floating around before some belters came in, or rock hoppers came and picked you up. Like, I don't know, just the way he kind of brings himself into the conversation and the way he looks, it just screams slimy douchebag to me. And obviously the events at the end of this episode kind of prove that point, where he ends up stealing Cortazar. And I do want to make a note before we go on about this. Was Holden going to go kill him? Is that what was going to happen after Fred talked about the fact that he was going to use Cortazar to, help implement or use the data they have for the proto-molecule as a weapon to help defend Belters, that way Earth and Mars aren't the only ones that have it, or, what have you. The question is, was Holden going to go kill him because he brought a gun, it was loaded? I mean, that's what I got the feeling of. Maybe he was just going to take him and then they were going to escape or something on the Rosinante. But as far as I could tell, the seriousness on his face and the music playing in the background, it sounded very almost like Joe Miller-like, where just the look on his face, I could tell that he was about to do something that, he wasn't 100% comfortable with, but maybe he knew it was the right choice. So I am really curious about that, what he was actually planning to do had Cortazar been there. But, of course, as we know, he wasn't. And as soon as he relays Fred and says, hey, he's not here, I think Anderson Doors took him. And then, they basically locked down the whole Tycho station. One of the ships ends up getting away, and that's when Holden basically shouts at Alex and Naomi, like, go chase him. We can't let them get away, and don't wait for me. So they go out in the ship, and they're chasing him. They do some really cool maneuvering stuff that they show in space with the CGI. I really like that. They did a good job on this, where, basically they cut the Epstein drive of the ship they're chasing, and they're like, oh, we don't have a target lock anymore. And so he's like, but don't worry, they'll turn it back on. They're just trying to maneuver around with thrusters, and then we'll be able to pick them up again. And they do, of course. Alex is right, and he shoots out the engine. But when they board the ship, they are not greeted by Anderson Doors, Cortazar, and gang. They are greeted, sadly, I have to announce, by my boy Diogo. And God, I just, he's young. And so I understand how he gets kind of brought into this so suddenly and without restraints. He's young and stupid. He just wants to fight for a better life. And I understand his reasoning and how he gets kind of sucked into this. But I really do kind of hope that now that they've captured him, maybe he kind of starts turning sides or something. I would really like to see Diogo continue on, maybe even with the Rosinante crew as like a comedic relief. I think he does a good job at that. I do think he has a few too many nudie pictures in his room. I don't know if any of you noticed that, but there was like a crap ton of naked girls just hanging out in there. I had not noticed that previously, so I guess Diogo needs a little bit more alone time. But yes, at the end of this episode, we find out that Diogo is on that ship. Cortazar is nowhere to be found. We do not know where Anderson Doors went. Maybe he's still on Tycho. Maybe he escaped on another ship. That's still to be determined, but I think it's pretty obvious at this point. And the news that Cortazar gave Fred Johnson this episode is very important, where he says the proto-molecule is still sending data or still reaching out. And I mean, that could be one of two things, right? It could, one, prove my theory correct that Joe Miller and Julie Mao are not dead, and Venus is becoming something of, something that could become shit hit the fan moment. So it could be that, or it could be the proto-molecule sample that Naomi kept behind the asteroid. And if that's the case, and that is where Cortazar and Doors and all of them are headed, we could be in for some serious shit moving forward, right? The last thing we need is an extremist group. Okay, like they were already screwing things up with the proto-molecule, that being the team of Protogen, and they were using a controlled experiment style testing, where they put it on Eros, and it was at least a contained system. But it worries me a lot what the OPA and these crazy extremists might do in the belt with a proto-molecule sample if they were to get a hold of one. So I think that that's a lot of stuff that is being foreshadowed by that, and I'm really curious to see where they end up taking it. Maybe they end up just firing it into Earth and, praying for the best, but I think that's going to be very interesting to see going forward, is what Doors ends up doing with Cortazar and if they're able to find the proto-molecule sample that Naomi should have destroyed. I also want to hit on one more important thing, and that is Naomi. Her in this episode and the past episode, I have a lot of questions for her. It seems like at times her loyalty is almost being questioned. It seems like she's leaning way more towards the Belter side of the argument, whereas, Holden's very in the middle, and then obviously Alex is Mars. And, I understand that they have a very, diverse group as their crew, and that can probably lead to issues. But at the end of the day, Holden needs to know that he can trust Naomi. And I think that they're obviously about to figure out soon that they can't, when she ends up either one, spilling the beans that she didn't destroy the protomolecule, or two, that she helped remove. I don't know if Holden already knows, but she helped remove those nuke, arming devices and stuff that were protecting the nukes from being hacked. And, I'm really curious to see where she goes from here. Does she end up leaving the crew because nobody can trust her anymore? Or does she kind of just, ends up apologizing, and then Holden ends up forgiving her? I think that there's a lot of questions there to answer. And Naomi is definitely going to have to step up her game, because she has a lot of questions left. And I'm not sure if I trust her at this point. So guys, that's pretty much all for this week. I really like this episode, and like I said, even though we didn't get huge moments like we did in some of our previous episodes, I'm fine with that. They're doing a ton of building for what I'm gonna guess are gonna be a crazy episode 9 and 10 episodes for the end of this season. I'm really excited to see what they can do. The canvas is pretty much blank at this point. They did kind of a reset after episode 4 or 5. I'm really curious to see where they start pushing forward. What narrative do we get entranced in yet? Is it just going to be a Gunny central arc kind of moving forward? I'm really curious as to see what they do to her. Is she actually going to make it to Earth safe? Let me know down in the comments below. Do you guys think that Gunny's going to make it there safe? Is she going to run into the Rosinante crew? Do you want her to join the Rosinante crew? Let me know down in the comments below. Like this video if you liked it. Dislike it if you hate me and you don't want me to do the Expanse reviews anymore, even though I still will. Subscribe to us here on YouTube and follow us down on social media. All of those links are down in the video description. And until next time, guys, we'll see you soon.